Hey guys, one of the most common criticisms I hear about One Piece from people who either tried to watch One Piece or to get into One Piece and just couldn't, or maybe they have caught up or watched a decent chunk and they just it's not for them. What's one of the top criticisms I've heard from these people is that there isn't really much character development in One Piece, and to me that always seemed like kind of a strange criticism because I always thought that character development was great in One Piece, probably better than a lot of other series. And I thought about it for a bit, and it kind of makes sense because the way Oda does character development is a lot more subtle um, than most other shows, and it doesn't really impact the core foundation of the character. And what I mean by that is like Luffy in East Blue is still the same as Luffy in Wano at their core. It's still the same personality, but there is some very minor changes to his more secondary traits that have occurred over time. So yeah, obviously you're not going to see like an Aaron Yeager level to switch from protagonist to antagonist in One Piece, but there definitely is a good amount of character development. It's just not quite as plainly obvious, and it's not necessarily changing the character as much as building upon like the traits that are already there sometimes, and sometimes it is changing the character or so changing their traits somewhat. So yeah, I'm just going to explain that a little bit. I thought probably the best example for these would be the East Blue Five, so Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, since these are the characters that we've been spent the most time with. So I'll go through all of them and explain probably a bit of the character development that I've noticed so far. And I'll start with the whole reason I want to make this video, Zoro. Because Zoro, I think, has some of the most brilliant character development in the series. And again, to build upon what I said earlier, he's still more or less the same character as he was in East Blue and Wano. As we were introduced to him, he was kind of a lone wolf kind of character. And what did he do in Wano? He went off on his own for almost two entire acts. So it's still the core foundation of his character is still there. At his core, he's still more or less the same person he was back in East Blue, which is why maybe people are saying, oh, he doesn't have character development, which he obviously does. And the line that makes it incredibly clear, and when I reread One Piece for the first time, I picked up on this, and I was kind of blown away by the progress that he made with the retrospective knowledge of what happened later. So in Shellstown, when Luffy finally recruits Zoro, one of the things Zoro says is, if you get in the way of my dream to become, the world's strongest swordsman, I'll kill you right there. Which, as we know, Zoro today is very far from what he eventually becomes. Because, as early as Brontier, he's essentially, when he suffers that defeat with Mihawk, it's no longer... He says he's never going to get defeated again, which is, probably one of the earliest big moments emotionally in One Piece that a lot of people remember. I think the Mihawk Zoro battle is probably one of the earliest big hooks for One Piece. And one of the big takeaways from it is that he's more so shifting to doing this when he finishes his little speech about, I'm going to become the world's strongest swordsman. He specifically says he got a problem with that King of the Pirates, to Luffy. So now he's not really doing the dream for himself so much as he's doing it for his captain. And then skip ahead all the way to Thriller Bark. And he's actively willing to sacrifice himself so his captain's dream can be achieved when he gave himself up to Kuma. So, that's a very far-flung from the initial statement of, hey, sure, I'll join your crew, but at the end of the day, I'm in it to become the world's strongest swordsman. And if you get in the way of that, I'm just going to kill you and leave or whatever. To eventually being so confident and loyal to Luffy's dream that he's willing to set aside his own life in order to preserve that. Which, I think is probably one of the most interesting and brilliant things for Zoro, especially since he's probably one of, if not the most loyal characters in the series. So yeah, becoming, from that lone wolf into, an integrated member of the crew who eventually becomes more. He very much fits the first mate role, even though it's not really his technical. The Straw Hats don't technically have a first mate, even though Zoro is the first member to join the crew. He is technically just considered a swordsman, but he does step up and take that leadership role a lot in Luffy's absence, and we see, especially during Water 7, in which he kind of holds Luffy accountable for what it means to be a captain, I guess, which is what I kind of wanted to talk about next with Luffy, because as I said, Luffy is still, the goofball, straightforward kind of guy he was back in East Blue, even in Wano. But a lot of his development comes in the form of being a captain, I feel. Because, way back in East Blue, he kind of just threw caution to the wind. Obviously, he still had that charisma that drew everybody together. That is very good for a captain's position. But as a captain, he wasn't terribly strong. He charged in head first, and often got sidetracked or whatever. Like with his fight against Arlong, he went straight in there, got defeated, got thrown into the water, and actively hindered the rest of his crew. But something that comes. Enies Lobby is probably the first. Enies Lobby in Water 7 is probably like the first arc in which he has to step up as a captain, and kind of figure out what it actually means to be a captain. Starting with the fight between Usopp and what's his face, Luffy. Like I said, Zoro's line there is probably more impactful to me than the entirety of the fight between Usopp and Luffy. Just because it sums up the situation so well. I don't know why. It's Zoro saying that this is the burden that a captain must face or whatever after Luffy eventually defeats Usopp. That line in particular just really stuck with me. And eventually in Enies Lobby, it's about him. He specifically states that he's going to take down Rob Lucci beforehand, but it's more so because it's not just because I don't like this guy, he's the big bad, maybe as it was in the past. It's more so about only I can beat this person, and it's my duty as a captain to protect my crew in order to do that. And we see that highlighted, especially again with Usopp, when Usopp comes and tries to draw Lucci's attention away from Luffy and be like, take me on, you defeated Luffy, he's obviously not getting back up, so I'll take you on. And Luffy sees that and he knows that Lucci would absolutely wipe the floor with Usopp, so he's like, no, I'm gonna get back up and I'm gonna keep pushing forward. So yeah, that's a big thing. Also, I would say the whole Marineford saga as a whole is probably big on development for Luffy. If nothing else, just because of excuse me, mostly because of the fact that all the rest of the crew is gone, so we obviously get a lot of time to focus on Luffy. But after experiencing the death of Ace, he post-time skip, he definitely seems to be a bit more cautious. Maybe not cautious, the right word, but he definitely isn't quite as prone to go in as gung-ho as he usually would. Obviously, we do get instances in which he does. Act 1 of Wano, where he just is just like, I see Kata right there, I'm just going to screw the plan, I'm just going to attack him right now, because if I can get him out of the way, then, we don't even need to do the raid. But, but pre-time skip, there wasn't, like, a single point in which, like, Luffy successfully executed a plan. You know what I mean? But post-time skip, you get all these instances in which the plans are like, and obviously they always go haywire because that's part of, building drama, and Luffy still at his core is a goofball that usually messes up the plan. But Luffy is more susceptible to, accepting these plans as, part of, when you're up against, these greater stakes, you have to maybe put a bit more planning into it. We've seen that in Dressrosa with Law's plan. We saw that at Whole Cake Island with Beige's plan. We're seeing it now in Wano with the raid plan. You know, he's actively, you know, participating in these larger grand scale plans rather than just, oh, if we just attack the big bad, then everything is over with. And that was his mentality back in Alabasta. You know, that one scene where they were in the desert and he just, you know, he just stopped walking. And had that little fight with Vivi because he was just like, no, I don't want to go and stop the rebellion. I just want to go and take down Crocodile, which in that instance ended up being the good move. But when you're up against people like Kaido and stuff, it just doesn't quite work as well. And he realized that, and, you know, experiencing the pain of being too weak and being too easygoing, not really experiencing this, or not really considering the stakes as he did in the Marineford saga. That kind of opened his eyes to maybe, you know, taking a bit more, being a bit more cautious. But at the end of the day, he still is mostly, you know, a goofball and will just throw caution to the wind. But he definitely does have that bit of extra, you know, I'm going to be a bit more careful to him than he did before. Usopp is an interesting one because his whole thing is being brave. And, you know, you could argue that he was brave as early as Syrup Village when we first introduced to him because, you know, everybody will spout that argument that, oh, brave is when you're, you know, actually afraid. And you still overcome that fear to, you know, actually accomplish the goal, which Usopp, as the most afraid member of the crew, and still ends up being, you know, useful in overcoming and defeating the enemy. Would that, you know, make him the most brave? And, you know, you would probably say yes. So, you know, maybe he was at the end of the day a brave warrior of the sea as early as Syrup Village. That's really It depends really how you look at it, but he definitely experiences different things when it comes to being brave. Like he all of his fights follow a similar formula, where it's like, you know, he fights the enemy, then it's not going well, so he like runs away. You know, with his fight with Chu in Arlong Park, he tries to play dead. With you know, what's his face, Trouble in Dressrosa, Trouble in Sugar, he just tries to run away, you know, that kind of thing. And then he has that, you know, inner monologue of like, no, wait, what am I doing? If I'm gonna be a brave warrior in the sea, I gotta stay and fight. And then, you know, he comes back, he gets, you know, the crap beat out of him as, you know, like repayment for trying to run away. But then he eventually, you know, overcomes it and wins in the end. Which, you know, it might seem like, oh, if we're just doing the same thing over and over again, there's really not much development happening. But each time it develops a very different thing. And I'd like to call attention to the 2 times he used Sogeking. The whole Sogeking thing allowed him to develop in 2 very key ways, both in Enies Lobby and Thriller Bark. In Enies Lobby, it was, as Sanji told him, you know, if you can't win this fight, there are other things that you could be doing that make you useful that I can't do. You know, that someone, you know, Sanji, as good as he is fighting, there's something that Usopp could be doing that Sanji couldn't do, that would play as much of a pivotal role. And, you know, Usopp fills that role by going to the top of the Tower of Law, or whatever it's called, and shooting the Marine soldiers all the way near the gates of justice to save Robin. So he figures out that, you know, just because that whole arc is him feeling, you know, that whole saga with Water 7 included, is about him, you know, feeling like he isn't contributing to the crew and feel like they're going to leave him behind in the dust. So he, you know, he figures out that even if he's not necessarily able to fight a certain opponent because they're too strong, there's other ways he could be of use. But then the other Bark is just the opposite, because he fights Perona, and instead of it being like, you know, I can't fight, but there's something else I can be doing that other people can't do. He is taking a fight that only he can win, that other people can't fight, because he has the negative mindset that makes him immune to Perona's ability, that for everybody else is pretty much a one-hit KO, more or less. So yeah, I mean, it's more, even though it's kind of similar, um, it's still like it's opposite. It's building two different fields at the same time. Um, it's building his bravery inside of fights and outside of fights at the same time. So yeah, so there's definitely some differences in which how he becomes brave over time, and obviously the Usopp Luffy fight in general was probably a big moment of development for him. But yeah, and Sanji also. Sanji is one where if you said he has no development over time, I would probably agree with you. But that's kind of part of his character. Um, the I would say the key like motif of his character is making it okay to be yourself, or discovering that it's okay to be yourself. As early as Baratier, the whole thing of that arc was, he was a big dreamer. He believed in the all blue, but no one else believed in that dream. People laughed at him for that dream, um, and he wanted to, be himself and go out to sea and discover the all blue. But he felt indebted to Zeph and felt like he had to stay there at the Baratier. And eventually the conflict at the Baratier helped him overcome that. And he went to sea and with Luffy and yada yada. But at the end of the day, it was a journey to be himself. And the other big Sanji arc, being Whole Cake Island, once again was him discovering again that it's okay to be himself. He went to Germa, um, and I heard time and time again he tried to do um, what he believed was right with his own like moral compass, and he just got more and more messed up for it. And it just seemed like maybe the himself being himself, or the person he believed he was wrong this entire time, because whenever he tried to be himself, it just ended up in more and more pain for him. But eventually he does give in, and Luffy mentioned makes him, and he says, "Oh, I want to go back to Sunny." um, it's really about being himself. It's about saying that who I am is he figures out that no, he was in the right all along. um, and yeah, and I think it speaks volumes that in that arc that is so strongly centered around him, and with an abundant amount of enemies, um, he doesn't get a 1v1 fight. I mean, only Luffy is the one that gets Luffy gets two fights. um, but I don't think any of the other Straw Hats really get any major fights. I guess you could say Nami and Cracker. Nami helped with the Cracker fight, but other than that, but what Sanji does is he bakes a cake, and essentially he beats Big Mom, not in a straight out fight, but using his other, great talent in cooking, and that was the very same talent that he grew up having ridiculed by his family, as kings don't cook or whatever, and at the end of the day, his cooking is what saved him. Um, so yeah, again, being himself. So at the end of the day, he doesn't really develop much because the main theme of his character is I'm figuring out that being myself is okay. Um, in fact, probably one could argue that he gets worse in a lot of cases in more so just like flaws, because post time skip, his nose bleeds to the level that it can like be fatal to him. So yeah, so yeah. Um, I would say that Nami, is the last of the East Blue Five, is probably a bit similar. It's just her, most of her development, I feel like, has mostly been centered around treasure. Um, the two major well, the two arcs that I would say are the most Nami centric. One of them I don't know if you could call an arc, but the Gaimon chapter. It's literally just Luffy and Nami, and Skypiea. Nami has a pretty big role in Skypiea, probably more so than other Straw Hats. I know she's the one that gets them all to the sky. She's the one that gets Luffy to the arc maximum in the final fight. She's the only one like left standing that Enel decides to take with him. She's the one that discovers the truth between Jai and Skypiea, or Upper Yard, and how they were once one and the same. Nami generally has probably the most focused out of any other Straw Hat, other than Luffy, obviously, during that arc. And the thing between the Gaimon chapter and the Skype arc is that they're both big treasure hunts. The big, for a series about pirates, they very rarely go on. The main goal of a chapter is very rarely, or main goal of an arc is very rarely to get treasure. Obviously, the series as a whole is to get the greatest treasure in the world, but these individual arcs are more so about beating people and moving up the ladder to eventually get that treasure rather than actually getting some other treasures along the way. But Skypia is about getting the treasure in the city of gold, and Gaimon's chapter is about just discovering that treasure that was supposedly on the island that ended up not being there. But the major thing I would say about Nami as being that treasure crazy person on the crew is that she's discovering more and more about what treasure means. And what I mean by that is first thing, when she was introduced, what happened? Literally, the first chapter she was introduced, she meets Luffy, and Luffy's like, "Don't touch my hat. This is my personal treasure." And Nami, obviously, with her background, trying to accumulate so much wealth to save her village, has very much been the traditional person who comes to value, material wealth. And eventually, by the end of Arlong Park, with the help me moment where Luffy plays the hat on her head, she comes to discover what personal treasures mean. More deeper treasures than just gold. And with the Gaimon chapter, it was literally just Luffy and Nami. Zoro stayed on the ship and slept. So literally it was just Luffy and Nami. And she discovered at the end of the chapter, there's no treasure at the top. But Gaimon decides to stay behind on the island anyway, because he's like, oh, these animals, the strange animals on this island are my treasure now, and I have to protect them. So yeah, a treasure as being one of her being treasure and money crazy is probably one of the most characteristics that have been most developed. Also, her kind-hearted nature, especially towards kids, has been somewhat covered upon. She saved that little boy who was about to attack Arlong Park. And in Punk Hazard, she stayed behind to help the kids. And we've seen she's kind of been in Whole Cake Island and Wano, she's kind of been contrasted with Big Mom, in which they both have kind of that mothering, especially in the past recent chapters where Big Mom has the mothering mode or whatever. But it's kind of contrasted between Nami and Big Mom, which they both have kind of that affinity for young children. But Nami does it better, I guess, because Big Mom is obviously kind of twisted once they kind of reach a certain age, or not even if they reach a certain age. She just kind of tends to, I don't know, bully them sometimes, I guess, in the case of Pudding, for example. But yeah, I think that about wraps up the East Blue 5. I guess I could go into some other characters, but yeah, it's pretty solid. I'd say that there's definitely, like I said, these characters are at a base level more or less the same characters they were back in East Blue, but at the same time, there have been some experiences that have given them very clear development, like these ones. So so the whole characters having no development thing, I've never personally understood because of such clear instances as this. But obviously that's kind of a personal thing in One Piece, obviously isn't for everyone. But with that being said, I don't really have anything else to say on this topic, so see ya.